And we're live. Welcome out there, in here, everyone. And everyone at the back. This is for juniors and seniors alike. Yes. So, and then, now that's making a buzzing noise. There you go. Right. Welcome again. So, various things. Evgeny has told me on pain of death that I must mention the office move at least once every 4 minutes. So, did you know the office move is taking place this week? So there's going to be a really exciting, lovely office next week, which we're all looking forward to. I think that the challenge is that during the course of the week, there's going to be people coming around with boxes. Things are going to be put into boxes. They're going to be moved around. It's going to be a bit chaotic. And so apologies in advance for any inconvenience that causes. I do hope you'll bear with us as we work out this office move. Otherwise, hopefully, fingers crossed, things will be good and we'll have a lovely new office. I'll just mention, I guess, kind of our office hours. Actually, maybe I'm going to go straight to over here. I'm also recording this as is our wont. Nice effect there. You'll see that a lot. Set that away. I'll come back over here. Aha. So I've got a few prepared items here. The structure. Oh, don't do that. Oh, Google. Google always wants me to press too many things. Come back. No, not that one. Okay. All right, you're going to be difficult with me then. Sometimes you have to take the computer out and you have to slap it around. Okay, there we go. So the structure of the Makers Week, you're just starting 12 weeks of Makers. Particularly towards the beginning, this is the kind of structure that you would expect. So on a Monday, we'll be having a code review of challenges that you will have done over the previous Friday and the weekend. So for those of you who are on the pre-course, you've done 1, 2, 3 challenges. Probably what we're going to be doing for most of the remainder of today is reviewing those challenges and see how you did. So that's going to be a regular fixture of Monday. Usually then through the rest of the week, you will be working in pairs on some sort of weekly project, and more details on that coming up. But yeah, we'll give you presentations, each morning on what you're supposed to be doing. But the sort of symmetry here is that on Friday, we'll be having retrospectives where we look back at the week, more on them in a minute, and we'll be having a Friday coding challenge released every Friday. And the point of the challenge is twofold. One is kind of like a self-test of your skills. You'll have been learning furiously during the week. On the Friday, new challenge. It's sort of a simulation of the kind of technical test that an employer might give you. So they'll say, right, take this away, do this. You've got 3 hours. You've got 2 days. Do it. You won't know in advance what kind of challenge it is. There will be a challenge, not unlike the challenges you received in the pre-course, coming up each Friday. Friday will be a day, to spend on that. You can have the weekend as well. But then, first thing Monday morning, we'll be sitting down with you and seeing how you did. Does that make sense? So related that to the sort of structure of the week, the office hours. I'm in here at 7:15, and I usually open the office. So anybody who wants to be, if you get here before 7:15, you probably can't get in. But I'll usually be here about 7:15, and then you're welcome to come in and use the office as you like. The office is open till 9 every day. We will, try to queue out at 9. Please be, we have a rota where a different person is closing each night. Please be nice to that person because they're having to stay late. And, we'd love to have the office open 24/7. I'm not sure exactly what the arrangements are going to be at the new office, but at the moment, at least for this week, it's until 9, with the exception of Friday. So Friday is our last day in the building, and we have to be out by 4 on this Friday. So apologize in advance. Obviously, you can start your Friday early. I believe they are actually going to come in here with sledgehammers on Saturday morning. So don't leave anything here on Friday. It's Friday, it's all out. Anything that you ever want to see again, take with you on Friday. Just hope that's clear. Okay. Yes, that's yeah. Any questions related to the particularly this week, the office move, the office hours, the flow of the week? I've been perfectly clear. That's obviously a success for me. Woo! Okay. Woo! That's how we start. So 2 other things. One is access to coaches. So we like to, the people who are here to help you get through this crazy web development material, we call them coaches, because they're not, I think, they're not at their best necessarily when they're sort of teaching you stuff. It's about coaching. We're supporting you being active learners rather than being passive learners and sort of sitting. I mean, this sort of situation we've got here, where I'm talking and everybody's listening, much as I love that. I mean, I do love that. It just makes me feel good inside. I don't think it's so good for you. And we want to kind of minimize the amount of time where you're sort of sitting there passively receiving knowledge. What we want is to make a transition from the kind of existing educational structure where you're sort of sitting and receiving into the, I guess it's the new world of education, where you are a knowledge predator. You're saying, I need to know this. I'm going to hunt it down. I'm going to grab it by the scruff of its neck, and then I'm going to eat it. Anyway, but you're grabbing the knowledge that you need to make progress. And we're not going to expect you to do that immediately on day one, but over the progress of the course, from week 1 to week 12, and some of you were here on Friday and you saw the fantastic projects, like the robot and the mobile phone swiping things and so on. That's evidence of people who've become really, self-determined learners. They're not sitting there passively waiting for us to teach them things. They are getting the information they need. They're getting the knowledge that they need to solve whatever problem happens to come their way. So, I was starting on, I get sidetracked sometimes, excuse me. Anyway, exciting, knowledge predators. Access to coaches was the bullet point that I had actually, I was supposed to be talking about, is so the coaches are in every day from between 9 and 10. Every day the coaches have their prep meeting. So they're not on the floor, they're kind of working out exactly the best way to structure the day for you. We also have on Monday, 5 to 6, kind of another coach's review for the week, so you won't normally see them then. I will be putting, there is a little whiteboard just around the corner there, something you might have seen. I'll be putting the overview of the week there every week and updating that. I'll also be emailing that out, so you'll get a lot of emails from me. But yes, that's, you'll see that, and it's subject to change. We're doing our best to try and make the course match the needs of every individual cohort, and every individual cohort is different. And there's different people and different speeds and different styles and different backgrounds and so on. So I hope when things do change, as they must, because change is the uncertainty, you'll kind of like roll with those punches with us. But so again, coming back to the point that I'm trying to make, which is access to coaches. So the coaches will very much be around on the floor between 10 and 6 on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and at your disposal. They'll have lunch breaks probably between 12 and 2. If they're eating their lunch, let them calmly eat their lunch if you can. It's kind of a bit, I don't know, are Maker students addicted to coaches? Seniors, any thoughts on that? I mean, the coaches are good, right? You like the coaches? You like having access to the coaches? It's like, oh, we like the coaches, yeah. So, but it's, to tell you, working at Makers and being a coach is very intense. You have this day where there's like these constant questions, and we love working with students. I mean, I say that, I think that's on behalf of all the coaches. We absolutely love working with you. We love working together and helping you solve problems. Do be aware, as you're going through the course, that it's quite intense for the coaches too. And so when it gets to particularly after 6 o'clock, often you might find a coach who's like just kind of like, and you might say, oh, I just got one last question. I know, and some of the coaches are nice people and they'll want to help you, but do try and restrict yourself to taking up the coach time between 10 and 6 each day. On the Friday, you'll be seeing coaches in the retrospectives. On the Monday, you'll be seeing coaches one-to-one in code reviews. If that makes sense. Any questions about that? Again, I've been perfectly clear. 2 for 2. All right, let's see. Moving on, my next point, I would say this is an exhausting course. Seniors, you know that already. You're working out, that whole work-life balance. How much partying you do at the weekend. It's we often say, once you start this course, get in touch with your friends. Just say, look, I'm not really going to be available for the next 3 months. This is it's a very intense course. It's emotionally exhausting. It's mentally exhausting. It's really draining. Do look after yourself. I think later on today, between I think 5 and 5:30, Ruben and Sam and Jordan will be talking to you, the juniors, more about that. So I won't belabor that. But yeah, so exhausting. Watch out. Look after yourselves. Try and eat well. Bit of exercise. Yeah. So we've talked about the Makers week. This is quite structured to begin with. As we go on, it becomes less and less structured. Towards, I think it's week 10, there'll be a Makeathon. Weeks 11 and 12, there'll be free-form projects where this structure will no longer be in place and you'll basically be working completely independently. There'll still be coaches around to help and support you, but it will be, we're getting you from that state of highly structured to less structured where you're just able to do it all by yourselves. That's where we ultimately want to put ourselves out of a job. We want all of you to be able to do this whole web development thing completely independently of us. And that's a painful process because, at the beginning it's very tempting to keep asking questions and asking questions and asking questions. What you want to try and move towards ultimately is a situation where you don't need to ask anybody, you don't need to ask some sort of oracle questions, that you can, through the process of working with your pair partner, working with your team, find a mechanism to find the solution, right? And it feels odd because you're kind of like, oh, well, these kind of guys around, they know what they're talking about, so I'll ask them. You've also got to be careful. You've got to wean yourself off the coaches as you go along. It's always painful. It's difficult for both. The coaches, we love working with you. We have to kind of like this whole mother-child separation thing. Anyway, sorry, it's getting a bit too Freudian. I think I'll move over to talking about something less Freudian, which is the agile process, which I see personally as I think this is the critical thing. If you only learn one thing through this course, and you'll learn more than one thing. You'll learn many, many things about yourself and about each other and about technology and so on. But I would say that this is the foundation. And this is my diagram that I've just thrown together of my understanding of Agile. It's become, a bit of a buzzword. There's a lot of different interpretations of it. The way I've got this set up here is, I think the Agile process is really, really, really simple. It's this, plan, execute, reflect cycle. And it's embodied in the Makers week, in that we have a process of reflection and planning on Mondays. Then we have execution of what we do through the course of the week. And we come back and we have our retrospectives on Friday with the students, with the teams, and so on. And it's this, you have a really tight cycle. Yeah. And this is, I guess we're doing Agile education. It's why the course has evolved quite so much since Ruben and Jordan did it almost 2 years ago now. It's a completely different beast because we're doing this cycle. I don't know how much this is necessarily going to mean to everybody right now. This is what modern engineers do in order to make stuff, to make software that actually works for customers. This is particularly in contrast to this idea of big design up front, which says, right, yes, we're going to negotiate a contract. Okay, we'll build you a new electronic health record system. It will cost you £8 billion, and we'll deliver it to you in 2 years. See you in 2 years. And the person who's the lowest number, okay, 7.5 billion, says 7 billion. Okay, there you go. We've chosen this conglomerate to build this big software system for £7 billion. See you in a couple of years. Right? 2 years later, yeah, we've spent all the money. Nothing works. Yeah. This is the disaster that happens time and time again with software. And the antidote is this agile process. And the critical thing about this cycle is that it takes place over a very short timescale of the order of a week. Different companies will do 2 weeks or 3 weeks or what have you. They might be called sprints. There's lots of different names for all of the variations of them. But fundamentally, they're about executing this cycle. They're about working closely with the customer. They're about saying, okay, let's get some basic ideas about what might be needed, the simplest possible thing. That's it, the simplest thing. Simplicity is very important. We'll come back to that. Plan that. Try and get some working prototype out of the door in a couple of days, in a week. Show that to the customer. Get the feedback. Does this actually meet any kind of need that you have? Does it work at all? Get that back, then replan. And do this again and again and again and again. Yeah. Anyway, you'll hear me talking about that so much throughout this course. You'll get completely sick of it. I won't go on about it anymore now. But I want to mention this other side here, which is that there are many different sorts of things that are associated with the Agile process. So, for example, pair programming, which you hear a lot about, which is about two individuals working together on the same coding problem and taking turns to actually type. So one person types for 15 minutes, another person sort of saying, oh, why are you doing that? Oh, and talking and thinking strategically, and then they swap around 15 minutes, or more or less. This is very popular part of the Agile process. Simply code review, we'll be doing some of you today. Scrums are these like having quick stand-up meetings where that last no more than 5 minutes to check in with everybody in the team. Test-driven development, you'll be hearing about a lot on the course, which is writing the tests for your code before you write the code itself. Object-oriented design, you'll be hearing a lot about that this week, about structuring your code so that it's in the form of objects rather than just in procedural form. And behavior-driven development, which is where we have user stories to describe what is needed. Now the thing is, with the Agile process, all of these are actually options. You'll find, like me, I've got my special t-shirt on, you might not be able to read it. Woo! Here we go. So I have my special Makers t-shirt on. Yes, absolutely. Yes, it's all about me, really. No, sorry. Bad Sam. No, I've got to stop that megalomaniac thing because I know it's not good for my press. But yeah, from this is me when I was just a coach here. You should notice my workload is promiscuous pairing. I believe in regular pairing and swapping those pairs over. Different person every day. I've paired with maybe over 500 different people now, all around the world, doing remote pairing. I love pairing. I'm all about pairing. But that's, and so you'll hear me going on about pairing. That said, pair programming is just one of the things that you can use in the Agile process. It's not required. Yeah. So some companies, they go for very like an end-of-day code review and have people working independently. You know, the critical thing is that all of these different techniques, they are options within the Agile process. What you need to be doing, and this is for you personally, individually as learners, and we have to do as a company and so on, is for everything that we're trying out, you know, we make a plan that seems like a good idea, we execute it, and we quickly get feedback. Yeah? Did the people hate pair programming this week? Did they love it? You know, did test-driven development work this week? I mean, as regards the sort of educational, shall we say, or learning process over the first, particularly 7 or 8 weeks, you'll be leaning on us to structure this for you. But we want to get you more and more involved in choosing which of the bits and pieces that we actually do each week. And then ultimately, when you get to the final projects, you're going to be choosing, you know, we'll be there saying, oh yes, you probably should use some behavior, use some user stories. We'll give you advice. But at the end of the day, when you're going to make your awesome kick-ass projects at the end of the course, and you'll be showing them to the world, it's going to be from a process of you having selected which are the, you know, elements and techniques and methodologies that work well for your team. Any questions? Oh, 3 for 3. I mean, maybe it's I'm just being too loud and obnoxious and no one wants to ask me questions. But I see this as the critical thing. You know, everything else, you know, nice, good to have, you know, can be very effective. But this process, I mean, it's akin with the scientific method. Well, I'm not talk about that at some point. But this process of very, very quickly evaluating whether the procedure that you've selected is actually moving you towards your goal, I'd say is absolutely fundamental. Yeah? If you remember one thing today, remember that thing. So, everyone's like, oh, this guy waving his hands around. And often I speak very fast. I am recording. The videos are available. You can play me back at half speed. A lot of people say that makes it more comprehensible. I have tried slowing myself down. I've given up coffee. It's just I speak at this speed. So anyway, hopefully that'll be okay. If there are no questions about that, and of course we will be going into the details of every individual thing through the course, let me show you the second thing that you should remember, which I've got here. And I don't expect you to understand everything on this page here today. For the seniors, more parts of this will make sense. And this is my overview that I've created of all of the components of what's commonly called a 3-tier web architecture. And you could say that this is kind of the Rosetta Stone of understanding web development. Right? Because our course here is, you know, become a web developer in 12 weeks. You know, we want you to be an awesome programmer. We'd love you to be an awesome project manager. But the key focus here is on web development. There are many other ways to architect software systems, but this setup is how things work for the majority of the web that you'll see. Jordan.
Are you going to be sharing this with people?
No, I'm going to keep it all to myself. God, Jordan, he always wants my stuff. He takes my toy. No, absolutely, yes. No, all of this will be available. It's being recorded now. There's a video of the whole talk. And yeah, these will be, I'm going to get a tattoo, actually, I think, of this. And, sorry, anyway. I need a pointy stick. I've got a pen here. Let's just go through this. This portion here, I mean, in my clumsy graphic, is supposed to represent the browsing experience that you are already familiar with in the web. Everybody here has used the web. They've done a search on Google. They've done this and that. Probably everybody here has like signed up for a web service at some point, like Facebook or what have you. And so we're used to seeing things like this in our browser, in Chrome and Safari and what have you, with forms that you fill in. Right? You have to put in your name, your email, other stuff. Some of them want all this information in order to give you access to stuff. Your submit button. What we don't usually see is all the stuff going on underneath that makes this work perfectly. So we can see there's what I've done here in these two rows. I've got the row here. This is kind of the base technology, the base languages that are supporting each part of that stack, right? And then this row here is the names of various different frameworks built in those technologies that are there to try and help make things easier for us building the top components. So if we start here, so and probably many of you are familiar with these already, and the seniors are more familiar than they want to be with these already. But so for the web browser, like the way in which that actually gets rendered and displayed, that's all using technologies we're probably familiar with, like Hypertext Markup Language, HTML, let's say cascading style sheet, CSS, and JavaScript in there for a bit of dynamic functionality. And I've got here at the bottom in a couple of places, but just a sort of trivial example of the kind of text that you'll see, when writing in one of those languages. You've got the HTML here, we're pulling in a JavaScript file, we're pulling in a style sheet. And these things, they kind of exist, they're browser technologies. Often the content of this document will have been served from a server somewhere in the cloud, right, or maybe even from your own computer, but it will basically be a flat text file with some funny angle brackets and different sort of syntax in there. And the browser software interprets that file and says, oh right, it should look like this, it should be a form, it should be an interactive map of the world, it should be what have you. I mean, all the different websites in the world are relying on this stack here. As we go through the course, I mean, we'll touch on each of these. You'll also see how there are frameworks like jQuery or AngularJS, that they're written in JavaScript as it happens, that allow you to build these forms, build functionality into your websites much more easily than just writing it all out, in the raw, so to speak. Yeah. So I mean, and this is the thing I think many of you designers, whatever, probably this is quite familiar. Yeah, you might not have heard of these particular frameworks, but this chunk makes approximate sense, right? And by the way, I love being interrupted. Do it like Jordan. Any questions you've got, if I'm going to, I will try and slow down. But so that's that stack there. And so yeah, as a web developer, this is the kind of the key user experience that we're working on. Can we get the right kind of forms and the right kind of sequence to appear to get the user to enter their credit card details and pay us lots of money so that we can all become insanely rich? That's partly what this is. Anyway, sorry. Okay. Yeah. But anyway, there should be a lot of money going on. What may be less familiar to you is this side of the equation, and over here we've got this. This is the stuff that exists out there in the cloud, that bubble in diagrams on the internet, the cloud, the other thing, which is Amazon has got these huge data centers. Pretty much everybody's running their services on Amazon data centers now, and there's a lot of legwork with there's just huge warehouses now filled with sort of racks of computers, the blades or whatever they are now. And with huge internet connections, and anyway, that's a whole separate thing. And I mean, you could do an entire Makerspace course in becoming a cloud computing specialist. But that's not what the focus that we have. But we are, all of the stuff on this side, all the servers, they build on top of that. But so there's these different this 3-tier web architecture. Is that in the first instance, when our browser, and of course it's starting to disappear, but we know that the browser at the top it has the URL address bar. Right in google.com or this. When we type in that address and we hit return, yeah, what happens is a request goes out over the network. And it's funny, that is a very, very simple request. For example, like here it might be get users new HTTP 1.1. And this is in the HTTP protocol. It's a hypertext transfer protocol. Yeah. So this request goes out, from you having clicked a button or from typed an address into the a URL, just google.com or what have you, into the address bar, and that will go to a server, some computer somewhere. Doesn't really matter which one. And the server will be able to respond to that and say, oh yes, that's correct, and it'll serve up some document like this, right? That's your basic flow in the kind of the old web. We'll see as we go through the course that there are other variations on this, but this is the critical one to understand in the first instance. There are a couple of other technologies going on in here. You don't really need to know too much about that support the networking. We can explain those if you really care. Just kind of getting your head around this sort of cycle is the critical one, and there's another important concept which is representational state transfer, which again we'll get into. But that's awesome URIs, awesome these things here. But anyway, this ironically for being web developers, we maybe care in the first instance slightly less about what the web server actually is. These are often written in low-level languages. That some of the Maker students might get into in their final projects, but maybe not. There's things like Apache, Microsoft's IIS, Thin, WebRick, Puma, Unicorn. These are all sorts of programs that are designed to very quickly, receive these kinds of requests and send back text documents. And this is a huge field. Probably as far as you'll get with these within our course is maybe in your final project, you might find that one of these servers is not quite fast enough for you, or it's like there are other problems with configuration, and you might switch from one of these to another, but you won't be. This is kind of like a tool that you'll have available, right? You might switch over. But that's another thing I should say here is pretty much at this level, these are all tools. You're going to be developing a web developer's tool belt, right? And you'll be saying in different directions, oh, I need a bit of jQuery here. Oh, actually, well, maybe I should use a bit of Node here on the server side. And there's this kind of mix and match process where there's certain technologies and frameworks you can use on the client side and certain technologies and frameworks you can use on the server side. And they're kind of mix and matchable because this is a text-only protocol. You could have JavaScript all the way over here and Ruby all the way over here, and they're independent. There's whatever you have on the client side doesn't say anything about what's going to happen on the server and vice versa because they're sort of disconnected through this text protocol. If that makes sense. So we don't have to care too much about the web server. What is much more interesting is this thing that we have here. We have an application engine. In the past, and still to some extent today, the web server will serve just static files. If you just have a raw HTML file, your web server can serve it. And you don't need the rest of these tiers. This is from the first tier. The second tier, or the application engine, which includes a lot of different bits and pieces, allows us to just serve a dynamic page, one that we've constructed on the fly. We want a list of the current users. The users are stored in the database, right? We want to dynamically compose the information from the database into the HTML and then put that up for the user to see, right? So here we have technologies that you're going to come to know and love and possibly hate. We've got Rails, Sinatra, Node, all three of these covered in our course. There's other ones, J2E.NET, which we won't cover. But so, for example, Rails and Sinatra are both application engines, they're kind of frameworks that are written in Ruby. Node, upcoming framework, is written in JavaScript, but these are effectively interchangeable in terms of what they're presenting. Yes?
Are any of these like frameworks, say like Rails, Sinatra, Node, can you mix and match at the application engine?
You can, in as much as you could have your larger application, you could have a Rails server delivering part of it, and then for another part of it, you might have a Node engine delivering another part of it. As things get more complicated, you can start to have multiple technologies working on the back end, but that's kind of advanced, and probably in the first instance, I wouldn't worry too much about that. But yeah, usually you will not have, for example, a Rails and a Node engine talking directly to each other. You might do, you could do, but usually for the purpose of like getting something done, you'll probably stick with one framework just for the time being. And then we've got an example here of you will have files on the server. This is an example of a bit of a Sinatra Ruby file that basically supports this kind of showing a new user web page. Now, you don't have to understand any of this Ruby yet. All of the juniors, you've been getting geared up with Ruby. Your Ruby knowledge will support you writing applications in Rails and Sinatra that will deliver some kind of web app. Yeah, which is why Ruby is important in the first instance. The seniors are going to start on Node this week, and they'll be seeing how JavaScript, which in the past has only been on the browser side, can now be used on the server side in order to actually do the same sorts of things. And that has particular, each of these frameworks has different pros and cons. And at different points in the course, as well as introducing the frameworks, we'll be trying to take you through, given a certain sort of application and a certain sort of customer requirements, which kind of framework you should be using. Yeah, because they're not exactly equivalent. And then, well, I guess I've got it here. Yeah, that these frameworks, they can be lighter or more complex. They'll often involve templating frameworks, object relational mapping. There'll be object-oriented design, object-oriented programming, functional programming. There's all sorts of bits. This is where the sort of software engineering kind of happens for the web developer, if that makes sense. And these words might not make sense to you, but by the end of the course, all of these words will make a lot of sense to you, right? And then finally, there's another side which we don't care so much about. There's the database, which can be one of these there are many different flavors of databases. You might have heard of Oracle. They'll also be written in these like low-level programming languages. There's this whole SQL structured query language, to interact with the databases. And you won't have to know too much about databases. Again, a bit like the web server, you might find yourself as you get into your project and you find that maybe the database is falling over or not being fast enough, maybe you'll switch from one kind of database to another. There'll be a process of like selecting which database that you use. But these days, it's actually the object relational mapper will kind of turn the things in the database into sort of programmed objects in memory, and then make them available and get them merged with templates to produce these HTML pages. There's a lot of different moving parts there, and I think I don't expect everyone to understand every aspect of this immediately, but I wanted to kind of give you a big picture, right, of how this all fits together. Yeah. Okay.
Just clarify, you started off by talking about the 3-tier web architecture.
Yeah.
The 3 tiers that you talked about, the first one on the left, the first one.
That's yeah. I mean, there's this one and this one and this one, and then there are also people.
So the
1, 2, 3.
Are those the 3 tiers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And sorry, one more question.
Okay.
Just about making sure I'm understanding the
Yeah.
diagram. In the middle of the diagram here, we've got on the small boxes.
Yes.
There. So on the far right, you've got C, C++, and 7.
Yeah.
What you're representing here, the bottom line of those two, those are the language.
These are the language. These are the languages.
The box above that is the frameworks.
Exactly.
And can you just remind us what the framework is? It's
Yes. So this actually came as a question on JCast on Friday about the difference in a framework and a library. So, for example, in Ruby being a programming language that you know, and so you might have libraries for Ruby. There might be a templating library that allows you to take some text document and merge it with some data. And so you'd say, right, we're using a templating library, right? You wouldn't call that templating a framework. Whereas in, for example, Rails, what Rails does is it takes a number of different libraries. There's a templating library, there's a sort of database mapping library, there's a number of different libraries that go together, set up to go well, and you can then kind of build your entire application almost at a higher level of description in that, if that makes sense. We'll hit that again and again as we go on.
So to clarify, a framework is almost a collection of libraries.
Yes, I think that would be a not unreasonable description of it. There's usually it's slightly greater than the sum of the parts, though, in as much as by putting that set of libraries together, you've actually raised the level of discourse. You can now describe things in a higher level. You might have an application where I happen to be using these 3 libraries. You wouldn't start calling it a framework until you were sort of demonstrating there was some way to raise the level of abstraction, if that makes sense. And to be clear, when let's go.
Yeah, so just to lead on from that,
Yes.
I guess a web framework has a certain perspective. So like for Rails,
Yes.
you would use Rails for web development.
You would, yes.
So you would use Dashing for...
In anger. If you're really frustrated and had high pain thresholds, yes.
So you'd use it for dashboards. And
No, Dashing would be used for dashboards, yes.
dashboards.
Yes, and Dashing is an engine for Rails, which is another thing about frameworks, is that they tend to allow you to plug things into them to improve their functionality. So there's another, I mean, the rabbit hole here goes pretty deep. But we're going to go as far down it as we can, as the 12 weeks allow. And then, I mean, this is about becoming a web developer in 12 weeks, but basically becoming a web developer or software engineer will take the rest of your life. Yeah, we will give you the highest powered, octane-fueled, nitrous, whatever start that you can get anywhere in the world, right? But ultimately, what we're going to show you is not every aspect of this. This is partly why, this is not the most important. It's like, so the critical thing is not necessarily this. The critical thing is this ability to learn things like this. Yeah, and there are, if you get on to doing stuff with robots or peer-to-peer or machine learning or this, that, and the other, this architecture, this high-level architecture, becomes much less important. If you're doing something where you're serving web pages and you want to give this interactive experience to a user on the web or a tablet or on their laptops, this is quite important. But at the end of the day, this is less important than your ability to learn new things like this, because this is already actually being superseded with frameworks like, we'll talk to you about Ajax, with synchronous requests, with WebSockets, with having different kinds of, sort of live feeds and so on. This is, although still somewhat current, it's kind of going out of date. So don't worry too much about memorizing every aspect of this, although I think it will be useful for our particular course in the way that we're currently teaching it. But it's your ability to absorb these new concepts put them into practice, find out what's working, what's not working. That's the critical thing. And jazz hands. This is another maker thing is, if you agree with something new, jazz hands. Jordan was going back up. Jordan. Sorry, Jake.
Just quickly, the relationship between these three tiers, are
Yes.
they three different aspects of the thing, or do they have a relationship between these tiers? Are they hierarchical?
They're more in sequence. I mean, you also hear people talk about 4 tiers, and I think some people refer to the client as the first tier, and this is the browser, and this is the second, and so on. And I think, I would say that it's less important exactly which tier than that you see this as there's sort of a sequence here. What tends to be happening here is that in order to, as you scale, as millions of users now want the service that you've created as a result of being on the Maker's Academy course, and you're being feted around the world, but your servers must scale, right? It's people are getting really excited about the application that you've created. The thing is that these things can be sort of scaled somewhat independently. In the web server will be running independently from the application engine, which will be running independently from the database. And so you might have multiple web servers, and they have this pool of web servers that are taking incoming requests, and then they're sort of multiplexing and talking to the application engine, and you might have multiple of those application engines that are all talking to that, and then you'll have the database, and they're kind of basically, you can have almost 3 different pools of computers serving each of these 3 things, and I guess I didn't really get the arrows in because it was too small. I'll do more diagrams like this as we go on, but it's really all about this flow. This information request comes in here, it's passed off to the application engine with some logic that says, is this person allowed access to this, that, and the other? I'm not sure. They'll talk to the database. They'll get back some persistently stored data. It'll be oh yes, right, there we go. We'll kind of grab that, manipulate it in certain ways, make it, they want it ordered in this and that, and that. Oh, his hands, things. Shadow puppets, sorry. All right, focus, what are you talking about? Yes, it's coming back to the database. It'll get merged with some kind of text template, and then be spewed out, if that's the right term, back into the web browser, where you'll have some kind of view, and the person will go, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. I want to give you my credit card details. Is the in short. Does that cover? Please. Okay, so I can put my line through 3-tier web architecture. Any other questions on this topic? David.
You mentioned the stack.
I mentioned the stack.
So this stack. Is that something? What is the stack?
Well, you can sort of talk about each of these things having a stack in that, this is a stack where we've got this at the low level and we put these frameworks on top of it. And then the interesting thing is AngularJS actually builds on top of jQuery. And then, this actually reminds me of an important point. I was sort of talking about raising the level of abstraction. What Rails does is it almost provides a language for talking about web applications. You can describe at a higher level of discourse what the web application should do in the Rails language. It's almost, although it's written in Ruby and you use bits of Ruby, it's almost another level of language. And this is a very common theme for all of computer science, for all of software engineering, is, as you may be aware, at the very, very lowest level, everything on your computer is represented in 1s and 0s, into sort of a high and low voltage, right? And originally, for the very first computers, that's how you had to program them. You had to give them little programs in sequences of 1s and 0s. And then it kind of moved up, and you moved to assembly language. And they worked it away, and this is very, very obtuse, ADD 7, SUM 6. If you want to, I, by the way, I've been a professor of computer science for many years. If you want to have the whole computer science stack talk thing, I can do that for you. We can get in there. But anyway, come and see me individually if you need that. But so, and so you go through assembly, and then there's sort of the critical thing is that kind of the software engineer mindset is one of seeing this kind of repetition, the 0s and 1s things very repetitive. Let's extract some commonality out of that, and make it a bit easier for the end user to describe what it is they want. So it's easier to describe what you want in terms of the algorithms in assembly than it is in the low-level machine code. It gets easier in C, then arguably that in C++ is actually easier, maybe it's a lot more complicated there, I'm not sure. But as you go up through these languages, modern languages like Ruby and C# make it much more easy to describe what you want the computer to do in a language that's a bit like English. It's not quite English, but it's getting there. Ruby's possibly one of the nicest languages for those so far. Let's see. There are big, religious wars about Python versus Ruby versus who knows what. But then this process here, for example, of moving up from JavaScript, jQuery, although it's a library in JavaScript, makes it so much easier to describe to JavaScript what you want it to do in terms of this nice animation in the browser and so on. AngularJS, that sort of experimental thing that Google has done that people have mixed feelings about. I mean, you'll get into another thing here is well, here I'm sidetracked. I'm riffing here on like the development of these technologies over time is a process of trying to raise the level of abstraction so that you can describe what you want the system to do in as concise a fashion as possible, right? But it's not a top-down thing. It's not that there is a big monotheistic religion and Bill Gates is saying, yes, there will be a language of this kind. Actually, that does happen in Microsoft development, right? And if you want to experience the perils and pains and that, whatever, go and join Microsoft shop and my condolences. But that's the cathedral model of development, and we all know how well Microsoft does. See Windows 8? Anyway. The alternative to the cathedral is the bazaar, and there's a very is it bizarre or bazaar? Anyway, it's pretty bizarre. Anyway, there's a very famous essay by, I believe it's Eric Raymond, who's a sort of software pioneer, on the cathedral versus the bazaar, and it characterizes the development of cathedrals, which require these big top-down, building processes to get things done, and it's all right, you must do, and everybody is a little cog fitting into this large, wonderful machine. And if it works well, it works fantastically, and if it doesn't, then nothing happens. And the alternative, and this is sort of the open source software development process, is much more like a bazaar. I guess this is sort of, is it an Arabian bazaar? I don't know. But basically, everybody's setting up their own stall and selling their own thing, right? And there's no big overall architect saying, yes, you must sell this in this area, and you must sell this other thing in that other area. It's much more about, just all the people selling the spices happen to congregate in the same area, and a sort of a process and a market price develops. So many of you might not be familiar with open source, but so many of the components in the system, for example, Ruby, Rails, Apache, Postgre, many other things that are making all of this work, all of the code that makes them run is available for free online. Anyone can access them. Anyone can make contributions to say, this bit is insecure, change this bit, what have you. There is kind of a bazaar, a selling process. It's not being sold. There's kind of like this cornucopia of different software available for free. And outside of the kind of Microsoft and Apple worlds, and actually this is Linux, the open source operating system, really the majority of the web is running on this open source software that's developed in this kind of chaotic, bottom-up, grassroots process. And you might be coming into this thinking, oh yes, there's going to be a big, right, when I use AngularJS or I use one of these things, that's going to be a well-architected piece of something that's been, carefully coordinated to fit in with everything else. Wrong. That's just not how it works. There is a fight going on currently between Rails and Node. That both, Rails is a bit more established, Node is upcoming. Web developers are agonizing. Should I carry on programming this, or is this the one to jump to? I'm not sure. Similarly with AngularJS, Google's just announced that the new version of AngularJS coming out in 18 months is not going to be backwards compatible with the previous versions of AngularJS, and the web developers are up in arms. Like, they've been really excited about AngularJS. All this stuff that we're currently building, you mean it's going to stop working in 18 months? When I've got to re-architect it? What are you doing? And there's these global standards systems. There's W3C, Tim Berners-Lee, great guy doing, I met him once though. But Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of HTML, HTTP. He's, there are these different organizations that try to bring together the different warring companies to get standards like HTML5 and CSS3 that everyone can agree on, right? But it's a bit of a mess. And it evolves over time. What's amazing is that it works at all, but interestingly, it does work. And welcome to that world. I laugh constantly myself. If you're not laughing, great exercise for the face, but laughing, smiling, good muscle exercise, keeps you looking young. What was I saying? I think I was talking there. So, two things there to summarize. One is that we're trying to raise the level of abstraction, right? As you learn to be a software developer, you'll find yourself seeing repeated patterns in the code. It's a bit like, have you seen It's a Beautiful Mind? Right? And you suddenly see these patterns. You'll be like, oh yes, I see a pattern, I want to extract the pattern. And there's this ongoing interplay of like, I'm extracting the pattern. Like the AngularJS guys, they've seen a pattern in the way that people develop apps, that work on the client side, right? And they said, oh, let's extract it in this way. And it works quite well for a good proportion of people, but then maybe not so well for other people. And there's this constant kind of boiling, bubbling, new abstractions are created and lifted out, new ways of doing things. That's what Rails is all about. It's like, oh, we see these patterns that people often do. often find yourself on the wrong end of that. You'll be using Rails or AngularJS, and the pattern that the developers have abstracted for is actually not the one that's going to work for you on the current project that you're doing for your user and your customers, right? And you may find yourself fighting the framework and needing possibly this, and you'll have this thing, well, we've built all this stuff in this one framework, actually it doesn't quite do what we want. Do we have to like throw away what we built over the last 2 weeks and switch to this other framework? And I'll just take us back to, that's the critical point in which the agile process comes in, right? Is because you don't know in advance which is the framework that's going to be working for you. So I mean, you can add in here, as well as these individual processes, you can add all of those frameworks and all of those technologies in there, right? And so the critical thing is that you don't spend too long beavering away on one technology and one framework and one sort of process without reflecting. Yeah, you've got to stop. You've got to ask yourself: is what we're doing here, is it making sense for our key goal, the next high-level goal? We want to deliver some simple thing to the customer to show them in a meeting next week on Tuesday. Don't spend 6 months creating that prototype before you show it to the customer, because maybe you have to find that you actually have to throw all of that away. Anyway, I'm having a lot of fun talking. I'm not sure how much fun you are having listening. There's occasional laughing going on. It's a good sign. But I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say here in terms of the introduction. I have a thing on my list which is questions. So any questions on any of that? Oh, just go on.
Well, I was just wondering, if you're beavering in one framework,
Yeah.
Are there certain tools or ways to think about it to say, let's try and find a whole new framework, or whether you should just carry on bashing over the same one? Is there a sort of decision point, or is it just quite subjective?
It is subjective. What we talk about often doing is doing spikes. So when you're very confident with a particular framework, you might be using things like behavior-driven development, test-driven development, because you'll say, like, well, we're pretty comfortable with this framework. We're going to stick with this framework. It's moving us forward. It's getting us places. When you're less familiar with a particular framework, you're trying a new thing in Node, for example, you might do what we call the spike, and you very, very quickly, for like half a day, just see, oh, how quickly could we just make something? And you kind of go, and then you reflect back with your group, even on a daily, like you could have daily scrums, and you go back and you'd say, was that good? And it's not very tested. There's lots of good testing framework. And so it's, it is very subjective, but all of you over the course of the next 12 weeks will be developing this intuition. Yeah, and initially your intuition will not be very good because you haven't had much experience, but we'll be doing, as coaches, we'll be doing our best to try and support you in developing your own intuition. I mean, to the extent possible, we don't want to be telling you what the right or wrong thing to do is, because we don't know. Because we don't know what things you're going to be building in the future. We've obviously got our experiences, but we want to scaffold you to help you build the intuition so that you can make the right choices going forward.
Does it happen that you've got web applications that have been developed and they're out and they're being used, and people are putting in version updates, fixing bugs, and then suddenly they say, do you know what? We're sort of stuck now. We can't get this any better.
Yes.
And the only way to do this is if we completely recode it in a different framework, and they go right back to the beginning of it, even though it's about there being used.
That does happen. Yeah. I mean, I took one framework and it was entirely in PHP, and I recoded it completely in Rails. That was one. I mean, it's not something you necessarily do lightly, but it does happen. Yeah. I mean, a final thing, at the risk of completely opening, I see my 45 minutes has gone. I don't know when it gone. We need these to have an alarm. I mean, let's put an alarm thing here to tell me that I'm just talking too much. But anyway, you're asking questions. But we should wrap up very soon. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is that what happens, and I think this is something I will stress this again and again. Keep it simple, right? The frameworks that we have here, right? All the different moving parts. It gets very complicated very quickly, right? And you might, at the beginning, be doing things like saying, oh, yeah, I'll have a bit of that and a bit of this and what have you. It gets very complicated and very unpleasant very fast, right? And it's difficult intuition to develop. You want to do things stupidly simple in the first instance. Get a marker point that something works. Just even that you can display the HTML in the browser with a hello world or what have you. And only add new bits of complexity, new ways of doing things, very, very, very slowly, and test that they've worked each time that you do it. I can't stress that enough. Because what happens to the majority of software projects is they just, it's so easy to add stuff, and we'll fix that problem with this more other stuff, and this other stuff, and the other stuff. And they get to a state, an interconnected, complex state, where you cannot add any new features without something else breaking. and they just become like a sludge, you know, and it's sort of there, and some of the worst jobs in the software world are just having to maintain some of those sludges. And there are actually, you know, many companies and banks and whatever will pay you a lot of money to maintain their sludges for them. It's very unpleasant work, but it's, you know, we get paid. We would like you to be working in a different domain, right, where you're able to create things that have beauty, the beautiful code with fantastic simplicity that is understandable and maintainable and can be reused for building wonderful things with a wonderful user experience. That's where we want you to be, and we'll do everything we can to get you there in 12 weeks. Okay, I think let's, you know, I will continue to be available to like rant on random topics throughout the course. You will like it, hate it, I don't know what you'll do with it. But let's wrap it up there. That's kind of the introduction. What I propose that we do, what actually is the time? I've been having so much fun, haven't you? It's 11:25. What we'll be doing is that we'll be using a wiki to coordinate everybody having code reviews. So we need to get you, the juniors, sorted out with, we've got an instant message system. I'll be emailing you access to the right wikis and so on. Basically, over the next half an hour, us coaches are going to go into a huddle, and we'll get like time slots for everyone through the day to have their pre-course. So they've got Octocat, Unixoid, and Chatterbox Challenge. I will say we probably can't necessarily review everything that you've done, but we want to get started on it. What we want to do, if I go back to our weekly structure, we want to get into our you know, Makers Week and get as many of your you know, the code that you've done so far reviewed today. As necessary, you know, if we fail to get everything done today, you know, we'll open little individual slots with people through the rest of the week. If you're not actually in, obviously there's a limited number of coaches, if you're not in a session with the coach, you can be continuing to work on, you know, I know that some of you didn't necessarily manage to get to all the challenges in the pre-course. You know, if that's the case, work on them now and book a slot with us later in the afternoon. But yeah, we'll come back to you in half an hour with you know, times that you can see coaches during the course of the day. Okay, any other questions?
So the pair program to learn.
Well, I would say the idea with the challenges is that you should work individually on them, generally. Yeah. What the plan for today, I would say, for today, and also, pair programming might sound simple. It's actually really, it can go really well, it can go really badly. There is a lot to say about how to make sure that pair programming goes well. And so we'll maybe start tomorrow with, there's various things we'll introduce tomorrow to do with testing and object-oriented design and so on. We'll also talk about pairing tomorrow. So I would say today, finish making sure that you've got your computer set up with everything that you need. Make sure that you're confident on, you know, everything that was in the pre-course, and you know, work with the individual coaches to make sure that we've ironed out any misunderstandings related to command line, basic Ruby, and GitHub.
I'm trivial, but I'm sure a few people today. What days do you have off around Christmas and New Year's?
Right. I believe we're all working continuously through Christmas. Isn't that the no? No? Oh, right. You know, we're multi-denominational here. I believe we have those 2 weeks. Actually, I think on my calendar up here. Yes, the way that it works over Christmas, if that's unclear for anybody, is that, yeah, so basically we have this week in this office, we have next week from the 15th to the 19th in the next office, and then basically the following 2 weeks, the office is closed for students. Relax, enjoy your Christmas. Jordan wants to say something.
I was going to say 19th is the last day in the like working this year, and 5th is the first day back next year.
So basically those 2 weeks are off. And I suggest relaxing, if you can fit that in. Yeah, any other questions, just administrative questions related to the office or anything else at all? If not, I will be seeing some of you individually over the course of the day, and I look forward to working with you for the next 12 weeks. Woohoo! Woo!